Welcome to the Knife Junkie podcast, your weekly dose of knife news and information about knives and knife collecting. Here's your host, Bob the Knife Junkie DeMarco.
Welcome to the Knife Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Bob DeMarco. On this edition of the show, I'm speaking with Zeke Johnston of the Alaska Blade Studio. Zeke hails from Soldotna, Alaska, on the edge of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge, where he and his wife run a custom knife shop, forging blades for wilderness enthusiasts and knife collectors everywhere. His knife models range from rugged but refined kitchen knives and EDC fixies to Damascus hunters and heirloom-worthy bowies and belt knives. Each knife, whether forged or stock removed, is one of a kind and highly labored over, reflecting the Johnstons' attachment to the land and legacy of Alaska. We'll meet Zeke and learn all about the Alaska Blade Studio, but first be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and download the show to your favorite podcast app. You see, that way you can listen on the go if you can't finish it right here. Also, if you want to help support the show, you can do so by heading on over to Patreon and seeing what we have to offer you there. Quickest way to do that is to go to theknifejunkie.com/Patreon or scan the QR code on our screen. Again, that's theknifejunkie.com/Patreon.
The Shockwave Tactical Torch is your ultimate self-defense companion, featuring a powerful LED bulb that lasts 100,000 hours, a super sharp crenulated bezel, and a built-in stun gun delivering 4.5 million volts. Don't settle for ordinary. Choose the Shockwave Tactical Torch. TheKnifeJunkie.com/Shockwave.
Zeke, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Bob. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure. Well, I want to ask you all about how you got started in knives and find out about your history with knives. But first, I want to talk about where you're from, Alaska. I've spoken to a couple of people, not that in the recent past, who are from Alaska, and it seems like a country unto itself. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be living in Alaska.
Well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, so I was actually born here in Alaska. I'm not native in the ethnic sense, but I'm native as far as my birth here. So it all kind of started out. My parents were living in a small community called Seldovia. It's has a Russian name. It's actually pronounced Seldovia. And my mom went into labor with me, and my parents were loaded into the doctor's little bush plane, and he flew across what's called Kachemak Bay to a small town called Homer, Alaska. And they say I was born something like 20 minutes later. So that's kind of how I got started as an Alaskan. And yeah, I would say that being an Alaskan, it's a relatively rugged life depending on where you live. There's a lot of individualism, and it's Alaskans tend to have a pretty I would say independent mindset, but also really, really quick to help. So yeah, it's kind of the mindset of, like I say, independent. There's also I guess I would say unpacking that a little bit, kind of the mindset of being self-sustaining is very important. So whether it's hunting and fishing, having a wood stove, that sort of thing. So.
It's funny that you say self-sustaining. I think self-reliance. On this show, we've been talking about knives on this show for 6.5 years, going on 7 years. And it comes up in conversation sometimes. What is it about knives that just draw people to them? And oftentimes, to me, I come back to self-reliance, because that was something my grandfather used to talk about, and that's where I learned my love of knives. And even though I live this suburban/urban lifestyle, probably very different from yours, I still love what knives represent in terms of self-reliance. To talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing I'd like to tell people is knives have been around, depending on your kind of view of the age of the earth, I would say somewhere about 5,000 years. If you look at the biblical text, it says Tubal-Cain was the forger. He was the instructor of all men in bronze and iron. That's I think Genesis 5:22. So as far as like the history of knives, we know Tubal-Cain was forging iron back in the day, and so they've been around for a very long time. But then if you look at kind of the more modern aspect of metalwork, but specifically blades, you see that no matter a person's status in life, kind of no matter their economic bracket, so to speak, or their ethnicity, people are all using knives. I would say it's the most kind of widely distributed tool in existence, and we've been using them for thousands and thousands of years. So very, very common tool. I would say to kind of the more modern mindset, they're also very kind of misunderstood as far as the kind of the intricacies of and mechanics of how cutting works, of how your basic knife works, and then definitely how it's made. Forged and Fire has helped a lot with that, as far as kind of getting a little window into how it's made. But even then, you're really not necessarily getting the intricacies of it.
I love that you brought up that everyone, no matter their socioeconomic status or their place in the world or their place in history, everyone uses knives. And the only other thing I've heard described like that is caffeine. Caffeine, long before coffee was popular, caffeine was in tea, and it's always been something that has, driven people in one way or another, something that has always been used, whether you're a teetotaler or a, no matter what your lifestyle, people go to caffeine and always have in one form or another. So that's very interesting. I happen to love coffee, so that's why it popped to mind. But there's something universal, and there aren't too many things in life that are that universal across, all cultures.
I agree. Yes, it's a really fascinating thought. It's a really fascinating thought, and something I think, I don't know if it's just that it's kind of ingrained in us as humans to be fascinated with I say edge tools. That's kind of a broad term, but knives specifically. I mean, ever since I was a little boy, and my wife and I have 2 boys, and it has not taken them long to have a love for knives. Something very fascinating about a forged, even a non-forged blade, an edged weapon or tool.
Yeah, and so you mentioned weapon and tool, and it is both of those things. And of course, the category of tool is so broad. It can be used for so many things. And then, of course, weapon, we're talking defending ourselves from things that are wild and things that are human. So a mass appeal. Tell me how you yourself decided that knives were your thing, and to bring us through your history leading you to deciding that you wanted to be a knife maker for a living.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in a little town from ages 6 to 14, a little town south of where my wife and I currently live. It's called Ninilchik. And when we lived there, I lived on a 160-acre homestead. It had a really old house that was added on to 2 or 3 times. Part of it was log cabin, part of it was like frame structure, and had a 34-acre hayfield out front. And so great place for a kid's imagination. And I'm actually one of 9 brothers and sisters, or one of 9 kids, I should say. And I was homeschooled, and I think it was just between Legos and my love for reading. I'm a voracious reader of all different types of books and topics, and in that I came across books, mostly fiction, about like the medieval period. And so I'm reading these fictional books, and I'm getting more and more fascinated with all kinds of medieval weapons. But of course, the ultimate medieval weapon is the sword, right? And a close second, daggers and that sort of thing. So I was fascinated by that. But what's interesting, Bob, is it never really entered my mind that I could make them. So one of the magazines I picked up when I was a kid was Windlass Steel Crafts, which I think, I don't know today what it's like, but I want to say it may be kind of attached to, is it Atlanta Cutlery or something like that? And so I'm looking through their catalogs and I'm seeing what they're calling battle-ready swords. I think most are made in India, maybe. But I was fascinated by it. It was hard for me to stay focused on my schooling because of my kind of obsession with blades. And fast forward to when I was 15 years old, we ended up moving further north up the Kenai Peninsula from Ninilchik to a town called Kenai, where my dad took other work. And at the local, he actually became a pastor. Which is kind of integral to the story because a boy at the church I became fast friends with. And interestingly enough, his dad was making knives, but he was doing stock removal. He was just, cutting and grinding from old chainsaw bars and circular saw blades. And so I'm over at this kid's house, like on the weekend, and he starts showing me these, not just smaller knives, but also like swords and stuff that his dad was making. And maybe not as refined as what you see in the market today of the handmade, but it was the first I had seen, and I was thrilled. I couldn't believe his dad was actually doing this. And so that kind of planted the seed in my little mind that I could do this. And so as a 15-year-old kid, I bought probably the worst tool that I could have bought for making knives, which was a bitch grinder, not a belt grinder like you see behind me, but a stone wheeled bench grinder. And I started cutting and grinding old chainsaw bars and circular saw blades, and not knowing anything about heat treating, but with that in my mind, that with the thought in my mind that I didn't want to overheat the steel, right, as I'm shaping it. So I made a lot of Scandinavian ground knives, which I guess I would say they have their place if built correctly, but I don't really consider to be the how do I say this while being really polite to the Scandinavian grind. If they're made correctly, they're a great blade. But there's some real specific things that have to happen for that blade to work properly. And I was not doing it right. I'll put it that way. I was not making them correctly. I think maybe my knives are cut hot butter, but other than that, not so much. Yeah. So I'm 15 years old, and then fast forward a couple of years. Actually, fast forward, I think it was 3 years, and we had moved just to the town that we live in right now, which is only 15 minutes away from where we were living at the time. And in the house where my parents, where I lived with my parents, there's a wrought iron handrail, and there's some flat mile steel stock that the fabricator had used in making this handrail. And I got the idea, like, I'm making this Bowie knife. I'm doing stock removal on this Bowie knife, and I want to do a curved D guard. I wonder how the guy made this, like made the curlicues in the handrail. So he happened to live just down the road, and I went down. Long story short, I didn't have the tools that I needed for making the curved D guard, but he put me on the scent of a local bladesmith whose name was Gordon Dempsey. And Gordon was described to me this fabricator put me in touch with our local community college, the welding instructor there, and he described Gordon, who I ended up meeting, as a forging dictionary. And so I think he gave Gordon my number, and Gordon ended up calling me. And I remember my first conversation, I asked Gordon, I said, here's the big question that I have is, how do you cut steel? And I remember Gordon telling me, a big hammer and a lot of fire. And I said, yeah, but like when you need to cut out the shape, what do you use? And he said, a big hammer and a lot of fire. And I think he was kind of trying to impress in me the kind of the beauty and fascination of the forged blade. And that was kind of where my journey began. So Gordon took me under his wing. I was about 18 years old, and he taught me how to forge blades, how to grind blades thin so that they actually cut, how to heat treat blades so they hold an edge well, and how to solder guards. I don't solder guards currently, but how to solder guards, and then finally how to make leather sheets. So that was my acceleration into bladesmithing. And from that point, it became a very serious hobby. My wife and I got married, August will be 12 years ago. And it was kind of our dream, or kind of became our dream, that I would build knives full time. And then 5 years ago, right about 5 years ago, we bought the house that we currently live in. My shop is actually, it made it look bigger than it actually is. It's a single bay, 2-car garage, but it's perfect for bladesmithing because knives aren't very big and you don't need a whole lot of room to do it. But it is a dedicated bladesmithing shop, and that was both me and my wife's understanding when we bought this house, or when we bought a house, that it would need to have some kind of a workspace for me to build knives in and do it full time. So it's not an easy business to be in, but we dove into it and acquired tools, and the knife making dream became a reality in that regard. So,
well, we're going to talk about the business in a while, and I want to ask you about your wife. But before we get there, well, a couple of things. First of all, Windlass Cutlery is still around. They do some OEM stuff for cold steel for some of their larger, less expensive fixed blade knives, and I have them, and they're awesome. But that's just a side note. But I love what your mentor, Gordon Dempsey, told you and kind of repeated: lots of fire and a big hammer. How do you make knives? How do you shape them? And because sometimes you mentioned Forged in Fire, my wife and I watch that show. We've seen probably every episode, and we both cringe at two things. One of them is when someone tries to heat treat in water, and the other is like, haven't you seen the show before? And then the other is when someone forges out a billet and then cuts the shape, like of the tip, say, cuts off clips it with an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. To me, that's no longer. Now you're starting to stock remove. You may have forged your billet, but you're not fully forging that blade. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy of forging a blade.
Absolutely. Yeah. So cutting the tip kills me too. When I see people cutting the tip instead of forging the tip. If it's homogeneous steel, or non-forge welded steel, non-Damascus, or non-laminated steel, if you want to cut the tip, that's okay, and you're not going to see it. And it's not that I personally, Bob, don't look at that as cheating necessarily. If it's a homogeneous steel blade, if you're working to produce a piece as efficiently as you can, and you hot cut the tip on a homogeneous steel blade, that's okay. I think that's that probably is not allowed in the realm of the American Bladesmith Society. Definitely with forged blades, with forged welded blades like Damascus. If you're hot cutting the tip, then your pattern just looks like it runs off the end, essentially. And I take a lot of pride all my Damascus blades, and a lot of my non-Damascus blades. So every single one of my Damascus blades and a large portion of my non-Damascus blades have the tips forged in. And it's really neat because when you look at my blades or other smiths' blades, you can see that the pattern actually compresses along the edge and then flows up towards the tip. So if that were not the case, it would be hot cut, and you might see the pattern bend just a little bit where the smith forged that kind of what you would call the tonto, what I call an American tonto, kind of that hard turn. You might see it just curve up a little bit, and then the rest of the pattern will kind of run off the end. So yeah, it's like you got to the point in which you forge the Damascus, why would you ruin it by not forging in the tip? So yeah, I think that's very important. But yeah, so the kind of what I like to tell people is, I think I like to say that forging doesn't necessarily make a better blade, but it gives the maker so many more options for creating blades. And it also, the other thing that it does too, is it gives you a far more efficient use of the materials that you're using. And you know, there's something ancient and beautiful about the forging of hot steel. There's nothing like it. And so yeah, it opens up so many more options. I think the thing that is most exciting to me about the forged blade is the fact that I can forge weld all kinds of beautiful patterns. Like right now, I'm working on a kitchen knife for my wife, and it's Go-Mai, so it's 5-layer. It's got a core of ADCRV2 steel, and then sandwiched around that is some 15 and 20, and then to the outside is a jacket of mild steel. And all three of those have different characteristics, and it's gorgeous. I'm working on grinding it now. But if I couldn't forge weld, I could purchase some of that steel and I could grind it to shape. But forging and forge welding just opens up a whole new aspect, or a whole new world, I guess I would say, in the knife making realm.
Well, there's I mentioned cutting the tip in with an angle grinder. What about pounding out or hammering the bevels?
So I do that for sure, especially on my larger blades. So for me, it kind of depends on what exactly it is that I'm doing. So if it's a smaller blade, the overall thickness of the blade is, well, maybe like half or a third the thickness of like a large chopper, for instance. And so what I'm going to do if I'm forging a smaller blade is I'm going to definitely forge out the profile of that knife, and then I'm going to draw out the tang. But then on a larger blade, like I have a chopper here that I just finished forging yesterday afternoon. Something like this, it's got a spine of about a quarter inch thick. And it's definitely got the bevels forged into it. So that reduces the amount of grinding that I'm going to have to do to the blade when I go to rough grind it, which is the next step for this knife. So yeah, when I go to rough grind it and then do the finished grinding after I heat treat, having the bevels forged in certainly makes, not only is it an efficient use of the steel, but it makes it a whole lot easier for me. Personally, I like to have kind of an even distributed amount of fun in each aspect of knife making. And so I can forge, I can take a day or several days and do a bunch of forging, and then I'm kind of done doing forging, and then I'm off to grinding. I do a bunch of grinding, and then I do a bunch of heat treating, and kind of depends on what I have lined up. But yeah, I would say for forging in the bevels, it definitely makes it easier when it comes to grinding.
So are you saying that you work in a batch sort of way? If you're working on several knives, you do all of the forging in one run, and then you do all of the grinding for all of those blades in another, and kind of
that is my tendency. Yes. So it kind of depends. So we're a custom knife shop, so we take custom orders, and kind of there's a wide variety of what we do. So without getting too much into the business, to answer your question, we'll get just homogeneous steel knife orders, and like say a little everyday carry, and then we get like a Damascus chef's knife, and those are two very, very different knives as far as size and shape and the materials that are being used. And so maybe I have to forge weld a billet, for the chef's knife, and I have my non-Damascus steel on hand. And so so kind of depending on what I'm doing, I'll select like, well, what knives do I have ordered that I need to make? And then I'll forge like blades that are kind of similar, at one time. Or it all kind of depends, I guess I would say, on what I want to put in inventory and what are the custom orders that need to get done. But yes, I tend to forge several all at once. And it makes kind of the most efficient use of my propane, my gas forge. So that I do a lot of forging while the forge is hot.
Yeah, I have a number of different creative processes in my life, and I flex in and out of them. Work is definitely there's a lot of creative stuff, but I tend to like to work in batch format. Okay, I'm going to do for work, for instance, I'm going to do all of my editing across these several videos, and then I'm going to do all the color correction, and then and to me, like, I like coming up with that process, figuring out how that's gonna work. So it's interesting. And then when I was a studio artist, and someday I'll get back to that. It was this similar kind of process. I always have a couple of paintings going at once, and I'm kind of working on the same part of the process at once. And I don't know, for the creative mind, it kind of, you can really soak into that.
Yeah.
So on your website, you have these beautiful chickadees, and these are EDC fixed blades, and they're very pocketable. And I don't know, I want you to show as many knives as you have around you as we're talking, as for illustration.
Very good.
What you're talking about. But I also understand that this chickadee EDC fixed blade, it's a different process. Show us one and tell us how it differs.
Okay, sounds good. So here is, this is our chickadee model. It has got a 3-inch blade of water jetted 80 CRV2 steel. And you can note the hamon, the quench line in it. So these are all hollow ground, and they have a ground finish to 400 grit, and then I etched them in ferric chloride. And because they're small, they have kind of a thin spine thickness. I don't taper the tangs like I typically do on my larger full tang knives. But yeah, these are just such an awesome practical blade. I tend to tell people that for like a skinning knife, because there's a lot of hunters and stuff up here in Alaska, and obviously throughout all the what we call the lower 48. I was going to say lower 48. In case people don't know, that's what we refer to you guys as. It's the lower 48. It's not derogatory, I promise. It's just a reference. So there's a lot of hunters, and when you get, I tell people, if you get past like 4 inches for blade length, for a skinner, it starts to get too big. And I would say for your everyday carry knives as well, much past, people are going to disagree because it's up to kind of personal preference, but anything much past like 3 inches, maybe 4 inches at most, it starts to become kind of unpractical for your everyday cutting tasks. So I designed this chickadee, and as kind of like the perfect everyday carry fixed blade knife. And you'll notice that it's got almost a spear point blade. I don't think I would call this a drop point, although the point does drop. But it's got kind of a spear point blade, which I find to be really practical for just all kinds of everyday carry uses. So when I'm like, with what I'm doing, when I'm in my shop, I'm like opening packages. I'm cutting string. I'm cutting leather. In fact, with my chickadee, I'll whip it up on, I'll make sure that the edge is really nice and razor sharp, and then I use it for cutting out my 7 to 9 ounce leather. So think somewhere around 1/8 of an inch or thicker with my chickadee, and it goes through it like butter. I mean, when I touch up the edge a little bit, it goes right through it. So this is like kind of like the practical fixed blade knife, in my opinion. And then there's also people that like them for like a bird and trout knife. there's a friend of mine who owns a lodge up here. It's called All Alaska Outdoors Lodge, and they take people on ptarmigan hunts. And so I'm actually going to get him a chickadee here pretty soon. And they're just a super practical knife. So as far as how the water jetted knives are made, they're cut out. It's our design that I have sent off to our steel supplier, and they cut out the profile and the pinholes with high pressure water that contains an aggregate, which enables the water to cut through the steel. And what this does is it kind of provides us with the option of building a knife at a little bit lower price point than our forged blades, because we can just grab a blank, and here I'll show you what they look like. This is what we get comparing the finished one with the blank. This is what we get when we order the water jetted chickadee. And so you can see it's got the pinholes, and then it's got a couple of extra holes for a couple of reasons. One, it lightens the blade just a little bit, and then two, it allows the epoxy to communicate from one handle scale to the other. And then I also hollow grind the tang on both sides, which lightens the blade and allows more room for the epoxy. And then the pins are mechanically connected. They're 1/8-inch pins. They look like they're more like 3/16 of an inch. If you've got a highly calibrated eye, you can tell that in the video. But that's because they're upset with a ball peen hammer, and it provides a mechanical connection to hold the handle scales on, in addition to the epoxy. So yeah, these are wonderful little blades, and the fact that we get them water jetted allows us to produce them much faster than if they were forged. And then we've also got several other water jetted models that we provide. We actually have one that I haven't built recently. This is just the blank, but this is our Pathfinder design. It's what we call a combat utility knife, and this was a collaboration with a local kind of like a tactical shop. Some good friends of mine that own that, and I collaborated with them. And this is a really stout combat utility knife with a 5-inch blade. So another water jet design, and then we have kind of a larger version. Actually, how about I show you, instead of showing you the blank, let me show you what we call our Chinook model. This is not sharpened, you can see. So I'm holding the sharp edge because it's not sold yet. But this one's actually available on our site. But it's got a 4-inch blade, and it's right. I think it's the exact same spine thickness as the chickadee, but it just provides a 4-inch blade option for that person that wants something like a chickadee, but in a drop point, what I would consider a drop point design, and a little bit larger blade. But same thing, not a tapered tang, but yeah, just extremely comfortable in the hand. And I love 80 CRV too. It's an excellent steel type. And these blades are hollow ground and given a superior heat treat, what I call a superior heat treat. In other words, maximum edge holding ability, but because it's a high carbon steel, it allows for easy maintenance in the realm of like sharpening.
So do you? I mean, I understand the water jet. I know a lot of forgers of fine knives also make water jet. Have water jet models, and it's a great way for people who love your designs but maybe aren't up for getting a fully forged knife to get one of your knives. It's also a great way for you to move more knives. I'm curious about the heat treat. Do you heat treat them the same way you heat treat a forged knife?
I do. So as far as could I break down the way I see heat treating just for a minute?
Yeah.
So the forged blade, it goes from being forged, where you're inducing all kinds of terrible stress into the blade. You're shaping it, but you're actually being pretty cruel to that steel because you're bending it repeatedly as you're forging the shape. So you're bending it. You've got your billet of steel and you're bending it this way as you're working it. You're forging in the tips. You're compressing it really hard, and then you're forging in the bevels as you draw it out, as you draw out that edge. And then you really disturb the steel when you start forging out the tang by drawing out that little nub at the back and then stretching it out into a nice, substantial, either full tang or hidden tang. And so there's all kinds of stress that you're inducing into the steel. Obviously, you're heating it to where it's at a plastic, in what we call kind of a plastic state, where it's malleable with a hammer. But you're inducing all kinds of stress into it. And so because of the forging, you want to reduce the stress in the blade. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Now, on Forged and Fire, I'll just reference it because everybody knows about it. On Forged and Fire, they have a lot of guys do what is called normalizing. So they'll heat the blade in the forge. It's supposed to be heated not too critical necessarily. There's some debate as to whether it's okay to bring it all the way to critical, or if you should bring it right up to critical, but not actually not let the blade austinize, which is what the steel is doing. That's what we call it, is austenizing when it reaches critical. And so anyway, they bring at least near critical temperature, and then they'll let it cool. A lot of guys are trying to hurry it up, so they'll swing it around. So they're kind of like trying to air quench it while reducing the stress in the blade. So if you normalize, you should do 2 to 3 different normalizations. So basically, in the forge, bring it to near critical, and then let it cool to room temperature. And that's supposed to reduce the stress. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't make the steel what I would call, and others call, dead soft. And so while you can grind it more easily and you can still probably drill it okay, it's not as soft as it could be. The way that I was trained with bladesmithing is to anneal. And annealing is basically heating the blade up to close to critical temperature and then submersing it in some kind of an insulating medium. A lot of guys will use vermiculite because it won't combust when you stick that like 1400 degree blade into it. I use wood ash now, and that works really well. The guys like Murray Carter, if you've heard of Murray, yeah, that's right. You know who Murray Carter is, I believe. And he uses, I think it's rice straw ash or something like that, and which is traditional for guys who are doing Japanese bladesmithing, the traditional method. And so basically, all it does is it just insulates the blade, and it reduces the stress in it by cooling over a longer period of time. And to kind of visualize it, or kind of bring it home for people to understand, I like to say it's very similar to, you've been out and you're working hard all day. Say you're landscaping around your property or something, and you've been digging, you've been moving rocks, you're pushing wheelbarrows full of dirt, and you come in and you're wiped out, and probably it's going to be like that maybe later that day or the next day, you're really sore, your muscles are tight. And so what's the solution? Well, if you have a hot tub, you go jump in your hot tub, right? And what do? You sit there and you soak, and the heat penetrates your muscles, and it causes your muscles to relax, and it kind of reduces that stress in your body. And that's very similar to what annealing does, is it reduces the stress. And so you have to do that I say you have to. It's highly recommended you do that after a forged blade. It also makes the next steps in heat treating much easier. So that's kind of the longest step to explain is the normalizing or annealing. Next is hardening. And with hardening, you bring the blade up to critical temperature, and steel is going through this transformation phase. And so the molecules are agitating, and basically they reach a point in which it's kind of like, I kind of like to describe it as like a crossroads where you can either go right or you can go left. And so you can either take that blade at critical temperature and you can anneal it by insulating the blade and letting it cool slowly, or you can quench it in some kind of a quenching medium, and you're cooling it very rapidly. You're driving down that nose curve by agitating that blade in the quenching medium, and you're essentially freezing the molecules in that austenized state, and you're transforming that steel to what is called untempered martensite, is the molecular structure of it. Fancy way of just saying the steel is really, really hard. And if you drop it on the floor, on a concrete floor, point down afterward without tempering it, it's going to break the tip off. It's like almost like glass hard. It's very, very hard. And so that's the hardening phase. And then you want to move from the hardening into tempering. And tempering is essentially just heating that steel up to a temperature in which it begins to soften. And what you end up with is if you do your heat treating properly, you end up with a blade that's extremely hard, but you'll be able to sharpen it, and it's going to hold its edge. And it's also going to be really tough if the smith does his work right. And so steel, your basic high carbon steels, begin to soften at about 340 degrees. And I do a minimal tempering to my blades, and their toughness is basically based upon how much of the blade that I quench and that sort of thing. But those are that's kind of the process of heat treating in a nutshell. I like to say heat treating is a house, and inside the house are 3 rooms. You've got annealing, you've got hardening, and you've got tempering inside that house. And so where the water jetted knives heat treating process is a little bit different is I don't have to do the annealing. There's no annealing or normalizing that I have to do, but I do have to do the hardening, and I have to do the tempering. And so if you look at forging as basically just shaping steel with a hammer and fire, some people, let me just add this caveat in, some people believe it's actually adding quality to the blade. I don't tend to see it that way, at least not the way that I'm working my steel. But if you look at it as just like forging is basically just shaping the steel, and then the heat treating is where the steel comes alive. So whether it's a forged blade or whether it is a water jetted blade, you're I'm breathing life into that blade, if you would. And that's where it becomes what we call live steel.
That's why so many people say that the heat treat is the soul of the blade.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a dramatic way of saying that, but it sounds like annealing and tempering are kind of the same thing, except at a different part of the process. Is that fair?
Yes, they're very, very similar, Bob. They're just, it's just that tempering is done at a significantly lower temperature than annealing is. So, but it is, it's the same process of I guess you could say stress relieving. Yeah. So very similar in principle.
We could all use a little annealing in our own lives.
I totally agree.
Do you have any forged blades you could show before we move on to talking a little bit about the business and how you go about that?
Yes. A forged finished blade. One that's finished.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So here I have.
Oh, there.
This is a 7-inch fighter. So it's kind of I don't know, what do we want to call this, Bob? It's kind of a clip point, sort of.
I would call that a clip point, personally.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I should know because I made it, but sometimes designs blend a little bit, Yeah. So yeah, I would agree it's a clip point, and it's flat ground and hand sanded, and it's got a handle of Alaskan moose antler, and I got to show you this side because it's got some nice character here in the handle.
Yeah.
And then often moose antler will have some of this pink or kind of a light purple sort of that is on the inside of the horn. It's just beautiful. And then the spacer is black micarta. And then of course the guard and shim and pin are brass. And this blade I forged, that wasn't scratches on the blade, that was just kind of the oil on the blade. This blade I forged from a leaf spring, and then if you note the edge quench, steel is pretty amazing. It will tell you stories, and what the story this tells is that there's chromium in this steel. I knew that there was, but you'll typically get a much softer hamon when you've got chromium in your steel. So like your 1095 or 1084, your super simple basic carbon steels, or even W2, which I think has a little chromium in it, you'll get this really, really distinct quench line. And with your higher chromium steels, you get a very soft quench line. So yeah, this is a really beautiful blade. I love this one. And maybe I could just show you a couple of others. Let me, here's a very simple forged blade from 80 CRV2. Kind of a slight drop point. The handle is Hawaiian Koa. And yeah, just a very beautiful piece. Hand forged, hand sanded, and then etched. I like to etch all of my blades.
Before you put them down, let's see both of the sheaths of the knives you just showed.
Absolutely. So my sheaths are 7 to 9 ounce cowhide leather, and they are hot formed in liquid paraffin wax. So this is really interesting. If we listen close, we can hear this go into the sheath.
Yeah, it locks in.
So it locks in, and that's because of the hot paraffin wax dip. So each of my knives are, the sheaths are truly handmade as well. Yeah, they're hand stitched. I stitch them with a harness needle. And so they're very much a custom fit to each knife. I got to show you. Can I show you one more?
Yeah, please.
So this is a fillet knife that I just finished.
Ooh.
This has got an 8-inch blade of Damascus.
Hold it real still.
And see if I can show off the Damascus a little bit there. And then the flexibility of this knife is,
wow,
it's extremely flexible.
Jeez.
Yeah, our fillet knives are probably the best you can buy. I mean, they hold an edge extremely well. Actually, I don't know if I showed that side of the handle very well, but
that's moose antler again, right?
This is moose antler, right? This is going out the door in the next couple of days. It was a custom order, so I have my friend who I mentioned who owns Alaska, who owns this lodge near here. He took a fillet knife down to Costa Rica, and he filleted a snapper. And I was not really familiar with snapper until. Are you familiar with snapper? The fish with the fish.
The big red. It's a big red fish, right?
Right. Yeah, and their scales. I'm getting ready to drop a video on our YouTube channel really soon of him filleting with this knife, because their scales, the snapper scales, are almost like fingernails. They're crazy how thick they are. They're insane. And so Bob, he goes through. It looks like he's struggling, because he is struggling, because snappers, like, I mean, I'm familiar with fish and filleting fish and stuff because I live in Alaska and we got tons of fishing. I live 7 minutes from the Kenai River, which is like world renowned. But it's not that I'm not familiar with fishing, but this fish is like kind of on its kind of in its own category as far as toughness goes. So Bob is like filleting this fish and he's struggling with it because of how tough it is with the scales and the rib bones and stuff. And then I think he does 2 or 3 other fish in addition to that snapper. And then his ceviche chef starts cutting tuna, and he's cutting like not paper thin, but very, very thin little slivers of white tuna. And the knife is just gliding through it like effortlessly. He told me, he said, I'm going to put this fillet knife to the test. And did he ever? So really soon we're going to have that video dropping of him struggling through the snapper, not because he's not good at filleting, but because of how tough the fish is. And I was super impressed. The edge retention on our blades are they're pretty incredible. So, yeah.
That's cool. And it was really neat to see how flexible that blade is. I mean, that's
thank you.
a testament not only to your grinding skills and getting it nice and thin, but also the heat treating and the tempering.
That's right.
We're home. I don't want to not ask you about your wife. I know that she has been integral to the business and to even the inception of the business. Tell us a little bit about your wife's connection to the business, and we find this a lot with knife makers, you know.
Okay, yeah. So my wife, I would not be doing this without my wife's support for sure. I once had a wise man tell me, when I think it was right before my wife and I got married, he said, never underestimate the influence of your wife. And he didn't mean it in a degrading way to women at all, or to wives anywhere. He was just saying they're very influential, and recognize that, you know, don't think you just have the bull by the horns. And my wife has been extremely supportive of me. Her name is Bethany. And there's a little bio on our website, alaskabladestudio.com, and you'll see a picture of our family, my wife and I and our 5 kids. And what's kind of neat is Bethany, I actually met Bethany because of knife making. So it was when I was just doing it part-time, but I connected with a couple of homeschool programs here locally. One is called Connections and one is called Idea, and they're government funded. It's kind of like public school funds, but homeschoolers are allowed to use the funds, you know, because if you homeschool, typically it's all out of pocket, right? So through these 2 programs, they allow you to integrate with some of the local things that your public school students are also able to do because of the funding from the state. So one of those things is having local vendors. And so what I did was I connected with Connections and Idea, and I was set up to teach knife making as a class to students. And long story short, through a librarian who I knew, who was like kind of an aunt to my wife, I made connections with my wife's family. And so my mother-in-law reached out and said, you know, I have a son who would love to come take your class. And so we got it all set up, and I started teaching. And soon after that, I was invited out to a get together. And I think there was somebody who was trying to set me up with one of their daughters. And at this get together, I noticed Bethany there, and it wasn't intentional. I don't think the setup with my wife was intentional, but it was really wonderful. If it hadn't been for knife making, I very likely would not have met my wife. And so we married, I think it was 3 years, 2 years, I think, after we met. And she's been only supportive of me in this crazy venture. Knife makers don't make a whole lot, I'll say that, and it's a kind of a niche business to have. And but she has been. It was kind of a one-man band for a little bit there after I went full-time. But she has been. I've asked her to be more involved, and she's wanted to be more involved, and so she helps me with some social media stuff, and we just designed a really nice. Actually, you could see it there, the mug in there with the knives. It's actually in our merchandise page, but I'm not very tech savvy, so somehow it ended up with the knives as well, but on our website there. But yeah, she helped me like designing that mug, and helped me with our logo, and just super supportive. I think that's the main thing, is not that that's all she does, but having the support of your wife is huge for your dreams becoming a reality. And she's amazing, and she makes sure that our 5 kids don't die, and keeps them fed every day. And yeah, she's the best life partner I could ask for. So
amen. Yeah. You know, I met my wife knife fighting or learning how to knife fight in a martial arts class. And so
That's
we've been
awesome.
together a long time. And when I started doing this show, she was like, finally, you're gonna do something useful with all those knives you have. So yeah, there's nothing like a supportive wife, and one who understands knives. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you are a custom business mostly, obviously with the chickadee and the other water jetted knives. That's something you can kind of make and stock up on and sell as those orders come in. But as we pull into the station here, tell us about the kind of your business model in terms of the custom side of the house.
Yeah. So I would like to mention that custom is thrown around. The word custom is thrown around pretty freely, almost maybe in my estimation a little too freely. We say anything that's handmade is custom, and it is custom in that it's been customized. It's been built a very specific way by the maker. But typically, if you have something custom made, it's you as the customer have commissioned whoever is making your product, whether it's a car, a motorcycle, a sandwich, or a knife. You've commissioned them to make something to your specifications, and so that is one of a major part of what we do here at Alaska Blade Studio is we have customers who come to us and they may just say as little as, I want a knife from you, but I don't know what I want. And so we'll start asking them questions. And it's a relatively personal experience in that, personalized experience in that often I want to actually have a phone conversation with them to kind of walk them through the questions of what they're looking for exactly. Some people will say, I want a kitchen knife. I say, okay, well, here's kind of what I recommend for blade length, for steel. Here's the options for handle materials. And so I walk them through that process. So we are truly a custom knife shop. What I don't do is I don't make Gilhibben fantasy knives. I don't go that extravagant, but we provide a wide range of options from little everyday carries, to daggers and choppers and fillet knives and beautiful chef's knives, which those are like a category all their own as far as like learning to build chef's knives. That is like, that's a whole other animal.
I would imagine that's similar to the fillet knife category, because they're so thin and they have to be so flexible and tough and all of that at the same time. Yes,
they are that perfect balance, and then the cant of the handle is different. That's something that I've really learned this year, just how handles are canted differently. So tends to be like a slight downward cant for most of your everyday carry knives, and even your fillet knives. I tend to make them slightly downward swept. It gives you kind of an aggressive ability as far as cutting goes when you're filleting a fish. But then you have kitchen knives and your chef's knives. You're standing at your counter and your hands are around your belly area, right? And your hand your arm is like this essentially. And so having that slight upward angle of the handle on a chef's knife is actually really important. Not only does it maybe help keep your knuckles off, it is the opposite, right? And so kind of wrapping your mind around the mechanics of knives is really important. And it was something I didn't realize at the beginning. But that's kind of the beauty of having maybe like a one-stop shop like our shop is we provide everything from start to finish, and helping a person walk through that whole design process and maybe learning what they want when maybe they didn't know what they wanted exactly at the beginning. We really clarify that.
So Zeke, let people know how they get in touch with you and the Alaska Blade Studio and find out how they can get their own custom knife made from you.
Sounds good, Bob. Yeah. So the main way to get in touch with us is our website, which is alaskabladestudio.com. And on that website, you'll find the links to Facebook and YouTube at the bottom of every page. So if you click on the Facebook link there, it'll take you to our page. It's actually just a personal page. It's a creator page, and we found that to be really useful. But you can just message us from there. If you comment on any of our posts, we're going to see it and we'll respond to you. And that's a good way to get in touch with us. But if you go to our website, you can shoot us an email, and that's a great way to get in touch with us as well. So, yeah.
There's also plenty of eye candy on the website. So,
yes,
go there to kind of
that's right.
Get some inspiration. Zeke Johnston.
Yeah, we've got plenty of blades available.
Oh yeah, plenty of blades available. Especially, I noticed the chickadees, which they're so cool.
Yeah.
Zeke, thank you so much. Zeke Johnston of the Alaska Blade Studio. Thank you so much for joining me on the Knife Junkie podcast. I love your work, and it's been great talking with you.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Zeke Johnston from the Alaska Blade Studio, making truly custom knives. But if that's out of your budget for now, check out some of the water jet knives he has on hand. Those little chickadees are beautiful. And I got to say, the Hamon, I don't know, looks gorgeous. And they look like super practical knives. All right, for Jim working his magic behind the switcher, I'm Bob DeMarco saying, until next time, don't take dull for an answer.
Thanks for listening to the Knife Junkie podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review at reviewthepodcast.com. For show notes for today's episode, additional resources, and to listen to past episodes, visit our website, TheKnifeJunkie.com. You can also watch our latest videos on YouTube at TheKnifeJunkie.com/YouTube. Check out some great knife photos on TheKnifeJunkie.com/Instagram, and join our Facebook group at TheKnifeJunkie.com/Facebook. And if you have a question or comment, email them to bob@TheKnifeJunkie.com or call our 24/7 listener line at 724-466-4487, and you may hear your comment or question answered on an upcoming episode of the Knife Junkie podcast.